Your grandfather called it the ham that didn't pass its physical. That's the exact phrase in the Oxford Encyclopedia of Food and Drink in America. And he meant it as an insult. But your grandmother turned that same little blue tin into 25 different dishes. Breakfast to Sunday supper, she didn't just endure the wartime rationing of 1942. She cooked circles around it. Here is the number that most Americans never learned. The United States government was shipping 15 million cans of Spam per week to military bases across the Pacific. 15 million cans every week. That comes directly from Hormel's own records, verified by Smithsonian Magazine. And while the soldiers overseas were writing hate mail to J. Hormel personally, he kept a full file of it, called his scurrilous file. The women back home were doing something that no history class ever bothered to teach. They were feeding families on it, not reluctantly, creatively. One dish in particular, number 8 on today's list, was considered company fare in homes across the American South and Midwest from 1942 right through 1960. Not survival food, not rations, company fare. This is 25 forgotten wartime Spam dishes your grandparents ate to survive. Before we get into the list, you need to understand one thing. This is not a story about poverty food. It is a story about context. In 1937, a Hormel food chemist named Julius Zilgit figured out that vacuum sealing pork shoulder in a 12-ounce can prevent the meat from sweating inside the container. That meant no refrigeration required. And in 1937, most American homes did not have a refrigerator. 2 years later, the war started. A shelf-stable protein that cost less than $1 a tin became the most important food product in the entire Allied war effort. Britain was rationing everything. The Pacific Islands were cut off from supply chains, and in Hawaii, the U.S. Government banned Japanese-American fishermen from deep-sea fishing, eliminating their primary protein source overnight. Into that gap stepped the little blue tin from Austin, Minnesota. What your grandparents cooked with it. From Alabama living rooms to Korean military camps to Okinawan street kitchens is a story that spans 4 continents and 30 years. And it starts with the simplest dish of all. Number 1, pan-fried Spam. Slice it 1/4 inch thick. Lay it in a hot cast iron pan with a tablespoon of lard. 2 minutes per side. The instructions on the first Hormel tin said, ready to eat as is, meaning cooking it was optional. But women across the Midwest discovered something the label didn't say. A short fry in rendered fat turns the surface gold and cuts the saltiness in half. Soldiers were eating it cold from the can in foxholes in the Pacific. The women back home were frying it properly. 2 different experiences of the same tin, same year, same war. Number 2, the Spamwich, white bread, a thin spread of yellow mustard. 2 slices of Spam. Hormel's advertising called this a sandwich. American mothers called it lunch for the kids, Monday through Friday. During the war years of 1942 to 1945, this combination appeared in more American lunchboxes than peanut butter and jelly. The arithmetic was simple. Butter was rationed at 4 ounces per family per week. Sugar was rationed. Spam was not. One 12-ounce tin provided 8 sandwich servings at 37 cents a can. That was a full week of school lunches for 2 children. Nobody called it a wartime sacrifice. They called it Tuesday. Number 3, Spam and eggs. Dice it small. Render it in the pan until the fat runs clear. Crack 2 eggs directly into the Spam grease and scramble everything together. What the mess hall cooks figured out by 1942 is that Spam fat outperformed standard cooking oil for eggs. It browned faster, it seasoned without a salt shaker, and it was already in the pan. Field soldiers learned the same thing with a canteen cup over a fuel tablet, no kitchen required. They hated it, but they ate it every morning. Number 4. Spam potato hash. Cold potatoes from the night before, diced onion, spam cut into cubes, cast iron pan. No other fat needed, the spam renders enough of its own. By 1943, this was the most common Monday morning breakfast in working-class homes across the industrial Midwest. It was built on the Sunday principle. Cook enough potatoes on Sunday that Monday morning costs 5 minutes and almost nothing. The Hormel Corporation never promoted this specific recipe once. Never had to. American women figured it out inside the first year of rationing. Number 5. Spam chowder. 3 cups of water, diced potato, a can of creamed corn from the pantry shelf, 1 tin of spam cubed. That is the entire ingredient list. Wartime rationing had eliminated cream. Butter was 4 ounces per week. What the farm wives of Minnesota and Wisconsin discovered is that the sodium in the spam seasoned the broth without a single additional ingredient. No stock, no salt shaker. This fed 4 people off 1 tin. In 1943, a housewife writing to the Hormel recipe contest described it as the soup that saved us. Number 6. The hot spamwich. This one came with instructions. A free recipe booklet was advertised in Life magazine, which tells you something about where Americans got their cooking ideas in 1943. Clipped the coupon, you mailed it in. The recipe: toast 2 slices of bread. Layer on sliced spam, sliced tomato, raw onion, and a full slice of American cheese. Run it open-faced under the broiler until the cheese blisters. The Life magazine version didn't mention that American cheese was already being rationed by 1943. So in practice, the cheese was often whatever processed spread remained in the icebox. The dish survived the substitution. That's the whole point of every recipe on this list. They were designed to survive whatever wasn't available. Number 7. Spam tomato noodle casserole. In 1940, a full 2 years before Pearl Harbor, Hormel published a 20-page recipe booklet based on fan submissions from spam buyers across the country. 50 recipes, not developed by food scientists, submitted by home cooks. The noodle casserole appeared in nearly every regional variation. Egg noodles, condensed tomato soup thinned with water, sliced spam layered across the top, and baked at 350 degrees until the edges caramelized. The suppression on this one isn't corporate. It's personal. When the soldiers came home from Europe and the Pacific in 1945 and 1946, a significant portion of them refused to eat spam again. The casseroles their wives had been perfecting for 4 years were suddenly off the table. Some women kept making them, in secret. Number 8, the one I mentioned at the start. Sunday baked spam with brown sugar and cloves. This was not a compromise, not wartime settling. It was a deliberate act of presentation. Your grandmother scored the top of that rectangular brick in a diamond pattern. Exactly the way you'd score a Christmas ham, studded each intersection with a whole clove, packed brown sugar into every cut, and baked it for 45 minutes until a glaze formed across the surface. She put it on a platter, brought it to the dining room. On Sunday, a 1942 Minnesota women's magazine called it company fare, not survival food, company fare. The reason this dish disappeared is simple. When fresh ham came back to butcher counters after rationing ended in 1946, there was no practical reason to make the substitute, except the substitute, done right, tasted better than what most families remembered of the real thing. Number 9, spam scrambled egg bake. Crack 6 eggs into a bowl, beat them. Pour over a base of cubed Spam in a greased baking dish. Add whatever vegetables the pantry offered: peppers, onion, leftover peas. Cover. Bake at 325 degrees for 30 minutes. This dish solved a specific 1943 problem: what to serve for dinner on a Tuesday when the week's protein ration was already mostly spent. Soldiers in the Pacific mess halls were running the same experiment. In the Philippines and across Guadalcanal, Spam and egg dishes appeared on every roster. One veteran described it as the only thing on the menu that didn't taste like the war. He meant it as a compliment. Number 10. Deep-fried Spam fritters, and here the story crosses the Atlantic. Britain received Spam through the Lend-Lease program, starting in 1941. Hundreds of millions of tins arrived at British docks in a country where weekly meat rationing had been reduced to roughly 4 ounces per person. English school cooks did what English school cooks had always done: battered it and deep-fried it. Food historian Rachel Lawton documented deep-fried Spam fritters appearing regularly in English school lunches during the war years, and described them as one more in the series of horrors produced by the school cooks. One of those children eating lunch from a tin tray was a girl named Margaret Thatcher. She later recalled Spam as a wartime delicacy. Whether she meant that sincerely is a separate question. Number 11. Spam with baked beans on toast, still Britain. Heinz baked beans and white toast were the bedrock of British wartime nutrition. Cheap, filling, and available without a ration coupon. Adding Spam elevated a side dish to a main course. The mechanics: fry a few slices of Spam, stack them on toast, pour hot baked beans over the top. What the London rationing boards understood that most Americans never quite appreciated is that the United States government effectively fed Britain's civilian population through the worst years of the war. The Lend-Lease program delivered food the British government had no capacity to produce. The tins coming from Austin, Minnesota were not optional. They were the margin between adequate and not. Number 12. Spam with chips and mushy peas. This one never went away. You can still order it in British chip shops today. During the war years, North Sea fishing had been disrupted by German U-boat patrols. The cod and haddock that sustained British fish and chip culture were no longer coming in reliably. Shop owners substituted what they had: thick slabs of Spam, sliced and fried, served alongside chips and a scoop of mushy garden peas. The texture held, the price was right, and it tasted like something familiar to a population hungry for familiar. The dish survived the war, survived post-war prosperity, survived the return of cheap fish. It is still on British menus 80 years later. Number 13. Spam and potato pie. During British rationing, government-approved retailers quietly began calling Spam special meat, a designation that appeared in wartime advertising alongside the Hormel name. The language was designed to add dignity to a product that was not quite what it replaced. The pie, a short pastry shell filled with mashed potato mixed with diced Spam and rendered dripping. The fat saved from whatever animal products the household had used that week. Crimped closed, baked, no cream, no butter, no stock. The name special meat tells you everything about wartime British psychology. Nobody was pretending this was something it wasn't. They were finding a name that let them serve it without apology. Your grandmother in the American Midwest was doing the same thing with brown sugar and cloves. Number 14. Spam and rice, Hawaii, 1942. In the spring of that year, military authorities in Hawaii restricted Japanese-American residents from deep-sea fishing. One order, issued quietly. Overnight, the primary protein source for a significant portion of the Hawaiian Islands, disappeared. What filled that gap was the little blue tin. Japanese American families began combining Spam with white rice, the same rice they had been eating for generations, creating a combination that neither culture had quite imagined independently. The fishing restrictions were lifted after the war. The habit was not. Hawaii still consumes more than 7 million cans per year, the highest per capita consumption of any U.S. state, and it begins here with rice in a bowl and Spam in the pan. Number 15. Spam fried rice. Hawaii. The logic of fried rice is universal. Yesterday's rice, slightly dry, gets a second life in a hot pan with oil and whatever protein is available. For Hawaiian families from 1942 onward, that protein was Spam. Dice it, render the fat in the pan first, add cold rice and break it up against the cast iron, crack an egg in and stir everything together. What the Japanese American cooks developing this dish brought from their own culinary tradition was a specific technique. Cooking the rice to a particular dryness before frying, which produces separated grains and texture rather than paste. This dish eventually diverged. One direction led to musubi. The other direction led to the plate lunch. Both of those are coming. Number 16. Spam musubi, Hawaii. If there is one Spam dish that food historians and culinary writers have cited as a legitimate contribution to American cuisine, it is this one. Japanese immigrants adapted the onigiri, a hand-pressed rice ball wrapped in nori seaweed. The traditional filling was pickled fish or pickled plum. During the wartime years, the filling became Spam. Press seasoned rice into a rectangular mold. Lay pan-fried Spam on top. Wrap in a strip of dried seaweed. It appears in every Hawaiian convenience store. It appears in Hawaiian school lunchboxes. It is recognized in 4 separate journalistic and academic sources as a genuine cultural artifact. Of all 25 dishes on this list, Spam musubi has the strongest documentation. 4 corroborating sources, and it is the most alive. Number 17. And here the story changes direction entirely. Buta jjigae, Korean Army stew. The year is 1950. The Korean War, U.S. Army bases are scattered across the Korean peninsula, and outside the fences, the civilian population is close to starvation. Food historian Rachel Lawden documented that Korean residents were on the edge of starvation at the end of Wuwi, and conditions had not dramatically improved. A restaurant owner named Ho Gi-suk claims to have been the first to simmer Spam smuggled from a U.S. Army base with hot pepper paste, onions, ramen noodles, and kimchi in a single pot over an open fire. That claim is disputed. What no one disputes is the result. A dish now considered classic South Korean comfort food. Served in restaurants across Seoul on cold winter nights. The food soldiers threw away, fed a nation. Then it became something beautiful. Number 18. Spam gimbap, Korea. Gimbap is the Korean answer to the Japanese rice roll. Seasoned rice and fillings wrapped tightly in a sheet of dried seaweed and sliced into rounds. The traditional filling was egg, spinach, and pickled radish. In the post-war years of food scarcity following the Korean War, Spam became the primary protein. Today, Spam gimbap is sold in every Korean convenience store, packed in Korean school lunchboxes, and eaten by a generation that grew up in the 1960s considering it ordinary. South Korea is the second largest consumer of Spam in the world, behind only the United States. During Lunar New Year, a premium boxed set of Spam tins is considered a luxury gift. The food of wartime scarcity became a symbol of celebration. Number 19. Kimchi fried rice with Spam, Korea. This dish sits at the intersection of 2 survival foods, Kimchi, fermented cabbage with red pepper, had been a Korean year-round staple for centuries, developed specifically to preserve vegetables through winter. Fried rice was a universal technique for extending yesterday's grain. What Korean home cooks discovered after 1950 is that the salt and fat from Spam, rendered in the pan first, made a better base for kimchi fried rice than any cooking oil available at the time. The technique: render diced Spam, add kimchi that has gone slightly sour, add cold rice, press everything against high heat until the kimchi juice caramelizes at the edges. That caramelized kimchi juice is the reason this became a staple. Number 20. Spam onigiri, Okinawa. After 1945, the U.S. military occupation brought American food products into Japan. Okinawa, where 75% of all U.S. military facilities in Japan are concentrated, became the epicenter. Japanese home cooks adapted the traditional onigiri, a hand-pressed rice ball wrapped in nori, to include Spam as a filling. It was the same transformation that Japanese-American cooks in Hawaii had made a decade earlier. Independently, on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, two populations, separated by thousands of miles, reached the same solution to the same problem. Today you can buy Spam onigiri from vending machines in Okinawa. The occupation's most lasting civilian legacy in Okinawa may not be political. It may be culinary. Number 21. Spamsilog, Philippines. The name is a portmanteau: Spam plus sinangag, garlic fried rice, plus itlog, which means egg. Spam, garlic fried rice, and a sunny side-up egg, one plate, served at breakfast. The Philippines had a different history with American products than most of occupied Asia. U.S. military presence in the islands dated to 1898. By the time we arrived, American canned goods were already part of the domestic pantry. Filipino home cooks adapted the traditional silog structure, an egg and rice combination already common across the islands, by adding Spam as the protein layer. Today, Spam silog appears on the menu of every major Filipino fast food chain. It is morning food for a nation. The breakfast your grandparents ate out of wartime necessity became someone else's national identity. Number 22. Spam piccata, Okinawa. By the 1960s and 1970s, Okinawan home cooks had absorbed 2 decades of U.S. military influence and were doing something with it that nobody on the American mainland had attempted. Spam piccata, thin slices of Spam, dredged in flour, pan-fried in butter, deglazed with lemon juice and capers, served over rice. This recipe appears in a cookbook published by Okinawa Hormel, the local subsidiary, that contains 100 Spam recipes. 100. That is more Spam recipes than most mainland Americans think exist for this product. The cookbook's implicit philosophy: take European cooking techniques, apply them to the ingredient already in every Okinawan pantry, and stop treating the combination as a compromise. It was not a compromise, it was a cuisine. Number 23. Spam taco rice, Okinawa. This requires one moment of context. Taco rice itself is a fusion dish invented in Okinawa in 1984 by a restaurant owner named Matsuzo Gibo, who adapted the Tex-Mex food being served on U.S. military bases for the civilian population just outside the gates. Seasoned ground beef on white rice, topped with shredded lettuce, tomato, and cheese. The Okinawa Hormel version replaces the ground beef with seasoned fried Spam. It appears in the 100 Recipe cookbook. It is served today at restaurants across the island. Here is the detail that stays with you. Okinawa absorbed more wartime devastation than almost any place in the Pacific Theater. 75% of all U.S. military facilities in Japan remain concentrated there today. The island that was a battlefield became an occupied territory. And the occupied territory turned the occupying army's surplus food into something genuinely delicious. Not out of submission, out of creativity. Number 24. Spam Loco Moco, Hawaii. Loco Moco was invented in Hilo, Hawaii around 1949. A mound of white rice, a beef hamburger patty, a fried egg, and brown gravy, all layered together in a bowl at a working-class diner. The Spam version appeared across Oahu within years. Substitute a pan-fried rectangle of Spam for the hamburger patty. Costs less, cooks faster. And in the context of Hawaiian diner culture, it made complete practical sense. In 1961, a Nisei veteran named Seiju Ifuku opened Rainbow Drive-In in Honolulu. Ifuku had served in the 100th Infantry Battalion, a unit of more than 1,400 Japanese-American soldiers, and had cooked Spam for troops during the war. The restaurant today serves more than 1,000 plate lunches daily. Spam is still on the menu. A man who survived the war on Spam came home and built a business around it. That restaurant is still open. Number 25. The Spam Sunday Loaf. And we're back where we started. In the American South and rural Midwest, home cooks were pressing Spam into loaf pans layered with sliced hard-boiled egg and tomato, covered with a cornbread crumb topping, baked and brought to the Sunday dinner table. They called it Sunday loaf. They called it company loaf. Some didn't call it anything at all, just the loaf. Here is where this story ends. J. Hormel kept that file of soldier hate mail, the one the New Yorker wrote about in 1945. Hundreds of letters from GIs calling Spam the real reason war was hell. Meatloaf without basic. Training the ham that didn't pass his physical. He read everyone. And then Dwight D. Eisenhower wrote to Hormel's President H. H. Corey after the war. Millions of soldiers ate it, he wrote. He forgives Hormel for sending them so much of it. The women back home had already figured that out 4 years earlier. So why did 25 dishes quietly disappear from most American tables? 3 reasons. The first is the soldiers. When GIs came home in 1945 and 1946, they refused. They had eaten Spam from the can in the Pacific, in the Mediterranean, in the mud outside Bastogne. By the end of the war, hundreds of them were writing hate mail to the Hormel offices. J. Hormel kept the whole file. The wives who had been perfecting their Sunday loaves and baked Spam and tomato noodle casseroles for 4 years discovered that the men coming home wanted nothing to do with any of it. The second reason is prosperity. When fresh pork came back to the butcher counter and rationing ended, there was no longer a practical reason to substitute. The third reason, the one nobody mentions in food history, is that only the Pacific kept going. In Hawaii, in Korea, in Okinawa, in the Philippines, the recipes never stopped evolving. Your grandmother's pantry closed in 1946. Theirs stayed open. Today, Spam sells in 44 countries, more than 8 billion cans since 1937. During the 2008 recession, sales jumped 10%. During every supply chain disruption since, the little blue tin moved back to the front of the shelf. What those 25 dishes understood, what your grandmother understood, is that shelf-stable protein is not a punishment. It is a preparation. The difference between comfort food and survival food is 20 minutes and a little brown sugar. If something on this list reminded you of a dish your grandmother made, if there is a recipe written on a card somewhere in a kitchen drawer you haven't opened in years, I need to hear about it. Drop the name in the comments, not because I am building a cookbook, because these recipes are real history. They belong to real families. And every one that gets remembered is one fewer that gets buried. If this is the kind of thing that matters to you, the practical knowledge that America used to pass from hand to hand and eventually stopped, consider subscribing. There are more lists where this one came from.